one of the questions that we always get from customers is, can I create my own dashboards? Can I visualize my own KPIs? Now, for the majority of our users, the process starts at the same stage. So something or somebody requires a new material, design, packaging product to be developed, and the end process is when that product is going to be printed. So you would imagine that what happens in between would be fairly standard across companies within the same vertical or even across markets. This is, however, not the case, and what we see is that there is a ton of variability within that process. So this means that the KPI that would be important for an artwork manager within one organization would be completely relevant for somebody else across a different company. Now, there are different ways in which you can tackle this. So you could create a very complex system that will allow you to customize your own dashboard, and then this means that every customer or every user will have a completely different dashboard. This is, however, fairly complicated, especially considering that the number of KPIs that you want to manage is usually a handful. It's just 2, 3, maybe 5 KPIs that will determine how your process works. Now, the way I'm going to show you how to approach this is by leveraging an API system. So the idea is rather straightforward. You process your jobs through the system, and then you're going to use an API to extract a certain amount of information, and then you're going to put it in a system that is more familiar and easier to process so that you can get the KPIs that you want. So basically, in this video, which is going to be a sort of tutorial, I'm going to show you how to perform these steps. We only need 3 things. We need an API token, so we need to be able to extract data from our accounts. Then we need a placeholder, so we need to put this data somewhere that we can, where we can process it. And then we need a way to visualize and extract those KPIs. So it's a 3-step process, and we're going to do this without coding and hopefully within 4 to 7 minutes. So come with me and I'll show you how this is done. The first thing we need to get an API token, and this is a way for the API to identify us within the system so that we can extract information. This is fairly easy to do. I just need to create a new access token. I'm going to give it a purpose, which is, I'm going to be building a dashboard, for KPIs. I'm only interested in pulling data, so I'm going to make it a read-only token, so I'm not going to push any data into the system. And that's basically it. So this creates a token that basically will be a string of characters that is going to identify me within the system. This is the first step so that I can pull data from the system. Now, the second step involves extracting the data itself. Now, this is an API. I could code a system to extract the data, but luckily nowadays there are systems that allow me to do this without coding. And I'm going to be using one called Zapier, which is a fairly straightforward system to use. So it's basically an if this then that kind of approach. So the first thing I need to do within Zapier is I'm going to find the app, which is in this case is the Twona app, as my event, right? So I want to pull data when something happens. So in this case, I'm interested when a new job is put through the system because I want to obtain 2 KPIs, which is basically the distribution of the jobs across time. So I want to see when these jobs are coming, and then the distribution of jobs across my colleagues, because I want to see who is having the highest volume of work. So I'm going to select as an event the new request. Now I need to identify my account, which is going to be the next step, and I have to identify with a new account. And you do this by simply introducing the token that you just created. So this is my token. I'm going to identify myself. Now, once this is done, then I can go to the next stage, which is going to set up. Okay, so let's set up the trigger. At this point, I could set up different filters, but I'm not interested in those filters. I just want to get the raw data. So this allows me to go to the next stage. And then once the trigger is done, I'm just going to test it to see if everything is working fine. And indeed, you can see it here. I'm already pulling the data from my account, which is great. This is exactly what I want. Once I have this set up, the next step is to set up the actions, right? So the trigger is something is happening in my account. And when that happens, I'm going to be pulling the data to put it somewhere else. So the next step is, where do I want this data? And I'm going to choose to put this in Google Sheets, right? It's like an Excel system, but for Google, it's fairly straightforward. You can anonymize the data if you want, but it's a perfect place holder for your data. So what you do is you select Google Sheets, then you will have to do the same. So the event is basically, I'm going to create a row when there is a new data. There you go. I will need to identify myself again. So I'm going to sign into Google Sheets with my account, which is this one. There you go. And I'm going to accept that Google is going to be using this data. And then once I'm there, then I can set up the specifics. So I want to define how am I going to put the data in. So I'm going to choose the drive that I'm going to be using, which is, I already pre-created a Google Sheet for this. So basically you can see that here, so I created a sheet that is called Marketing Project Dashboard. It contains only 4 columns, which is what I'm interested at the moment, which is an ID, the project, the author, and the date. So once I set up the drive, I'm going to select the spreadsheet, which is called Marketing Project Dashboard, and the worksheet, which is simply, I think, Sheets 1. I could give it a different name, but it's not necessary. And now I need to decide which data I'm going to be putting in. So on the ID, I just want to have the ID of the project. So I can go here and say, okay, this is my ID. The project is going to be just the name of the project, so you can have it, I think it's here, so labels name, labels group name, yeah, so labels name, this is my project, right? You can use multiple sets of data or multiple elements coming in. Then the author, so again, from all the data that comes in, I'm only interested in the author, which is this one, the user owner name, there you go. I could also add the email. Just, if I wanted to, there is an email field somewhere around here, this one. So I could also add the email in case I want to write to them. And then the date, which is basically the date of the project, which should be here, date created. There you go. So I have my ID, my project, my author, including the email, and the date. And this should be enough. I'm going to continue this, and I'm going to test this action. So I'm going to test the action. And if this works out right, which seems to be working, in my Google Sheet, I should see a new row being introduced. So you can see that I have the project, the author, and the date, right? So that's it. This confirms that the data is being put into my Google Sheets. Now I'm going to turn on this SAP. And this basically means that whenever a project goes through the system, it will be put into my Google Sheet. So that's the first step. So we took an API token, we created or we put it within our connector to basically say, well, I'm going to be pulling data from the system and put it in Google spreadsheet. Now the next step is, okay, this is going to be populated with multiple projects, and we will see that a bit later. Now I want to create these distributions. I'm particularly interested in knowing what the distribution is in time. So I want to see when the projects are coming in, what the volume is, and I also want to see what the distribution of work is within my colleagues. And the way I'm going to be doing this is by using Google DataStudio. You could do this in a million different ways, but I think this is a very simple way to organize this. Now, Google Studio is fairly complicated to use, but for the basics is not that complicated. So the first thing you need to do is you need to create, connect to a data. So I'm going to select Google Sheets, and I'm going to select my Marketing Project Dashboard, which is already connected to my accounts. And this is going to be to allow me to pull data from these Google Sheets, right? To report. Now, once I have this data in place, then I can already start creating these, connections. So you see that by default is adding this block that basically is pulling the data from this, but I'm not interested in this particular, counter. So I'm going to be deleting this. I'm going to create my own chart, which is basically, I'm looking for a time series, right? So I'm looking for a time series, which I'm going to be using this one. There you go. And this is going to be the distribution of the projects across time, right? And this means that I can decide if I want to do it based on a date or the time of the day or something like that. So I'm interested to see the distribution through the day, right? So I want to see at what time in the day my projects are coming. So this means that my dimension is going to be dimension. That is not just date, but basically from data time, I want to see the hour. I want to see what time through the day these projects are coming. Now I only have one project, so I cannot really visualize this data. So I'm going to fix that by creating, let's say, a couple of, let's say, fake projects. So 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to change the time. So for instance, this one is at, it's going to be at 10. This is going to be at 11. And this is going to be at 9, but just a different minute. There you go. So once I have this data in place, I can go back to my dashboard. I'm going to refresh the data, and this should show me now more of a distribution. So there you go. So you have 2 of them at 9, 1 of them at 10, and 1 at 11. And at the bottom, I can customize the X dimension. There you go. That's it, where you can see the date and the hour, but I can also change it so it's only showing the hour. So instead of date and hour, I'm going to be interested in the hour only. So only the hour. There you go. So that's it. So I have 1 project at 2 projects at 9, 1 at 10, and 1 at 11. Now this data will be updated in real time. So this means every time a project is put into the system, this data will update. Zapier updates every few minutes, so this means that the data will be populated over time. Now this is the first of the graphs that I wanted, which is a distribution over time. This is my first KPI, and the second one will be a distribution across my colleagues. So if, for instance, I would have different names here, so let's say colleague 1 and colleague 2. So I have basically 3 colleagues, this one, colleague 1, and colleague 2. What I want to see is a distribution across this. So instead of a distribution across time, I want a distribution across the author. And I want to do this instead of in a graph, I want to do this as a table, right? I want to see the names of the people that are doing the jobs. So basically I'm going to set this up, and I'm going to set up, instead of a date, I want the range to be the author. Go. It's the date. The dimension is going to be the author. So that's my author. And I want the record count, right? That's it. The record count. That's it. So this basically tells me that the first user has 2 projects, the second user has 1 project, and the third user has 1 project as well. Now this data is going to be updated in real time. So this means that from now on I could focus in making this pretty, or making the graphs bigger or smaller or whatever I want. Now I want to show you how this looks in real life. So I want to show you a real example on how a dashboard looks like. So let me open a project for you. So this will be this dashboard over here. And then what you can see is that basically this represents a distribution, right? So you have the distribution, the volume of jobs being put through the year, plus the distribution through the day. So you can see there are peaks of times in the day when there are more jobs, and also the distribution of how many jobs are the different users handling. Now, this way of creating your own dashboard, it's very easy to follow, right? You don't need to do any coding, and it allows you to customize the KPIs completely. So it's far more efficient than having a dedicated dashboard system within your application. So I hope you find this useful, and if you have comments or if you would like to get some of these templates for the dashboard for yourself, just let me know in the comments, and then I'll hook you up. Cheers.